The Winter War by Priscilla Shire with Gina Detweiler, Chapter 35, Phase 2. The warriors waiting in the snow bunker had just begun to give up hope when Ivy and Finn appeared, carrying 2 small pots of water. "That's it?" asked Evan, staring at the tiny vessels in disappointment. "I know it doesn't look like much," said Ivy, "but these were the containers Ruach gave us, so they must be enough." "Technically speaking, that small amount will only produce enough of an explosion to maybe singe a few eyebrows," said Manuel, "assuming the lava forgers have eyebrows." "Well, this is what we've got," said Finn. "We almost didn't get out of there at all. If it wasn't for Sibylla, we'd still be in there." "Sibylla? Who's that?" asked Levi. "The Leviathan," said Ivy. "But she was bigger. I think she was a mother of the others. She called them her children. She looked pretty scary, but she actually helped us." "Sibylla is her name?" Levi asked. Ivy nodded. "That's interesting," Levi murmured to himself. "She wants us to help free her children from Ponyrose," said Ivy. Evan was bewildered. "How in the world are we going to do that?" "No idea," said Ivy, "but we told her we would destroy the fortress, so she helped us get out of there, after scaring us half to death." "We'd better get moving then," said Xavier. "Time for Phase 2. "So you now have Phase 2? Ivy asked. "Yes. Well, sort of. First, we need to find the path Levi and I used the last time. Then Levi and Brianna will carry the water up the mountain to the fortress. In the meantime, we'll need to gather the rest of the warriors and take over one of those sky pods." "You're going to take over a sky pod?" Finn asked, lifting an eyebrow. "Yeah, that way we can see what's going on in the fortress and let the warriors on the ground know when the attack is coming." "Okie dokie," Ivy shrugged. Then she and Finn handed their pots of water to Levi and Brianna. "You sure you don't need help carrying them?" asked Ivy. "We'll be okay," said Brianna. "Thanks, and good work. I knew you could do it." She smiled at Ivy, who smiled back. "Thanks," she said. "So, how do we find the path?" Brianna asked. "There were these 2 big rocks that marked it," said Levi. "We'll need to find them." He stuck his head out of the snow bunker and glanced up at the sky. It had stopped snowing and the sun was out, shining brightly, though the top of the mountain was still shrouded in the dark, poisonous cloud. "It'll be easier going now, but we need to keep a lookout for Ascalon patrols." "That reminds me," said Finn. "We ran into one of those too." "An Ascalon?" "Yeah. Finn jumped up on it and opened the hatch, and it was empty," said Ivy. "He did what?" "Came at it from the back," Finn said. "Like Brianna said, it can't see behind, but there was no one inside. We think they're being operated remotely." "Of course," said Manuel. "They're programmed to attack movement. Okay, let's do this." Impulsively, Xavier stretched his arm straight out into their midst, his hand out flat. One by one, they all put their hands over each other's. The orbs in the center of their breastplates began to spin, churning out words that hovered in the air over them, words they had heard before but were glad to be reminded of. "Be strong and courageous. Do not be discouraged. You are never alone." Xavier got out of the bunker and stood straight, waiting. As if sensing his humility, his breastplate began to pulse softly. He turned around until the pulsing changed to a steady glow. "This way," he said. "Better than a compass," said Manuel. As soon as the others stepped out of the bunker, a cloud descended upon them, materializing out of the air, draping over them like a soft blanket. "Ruach," whispered Evan with a smile. They walked in single file, with Xavier leading the way. The cloud hovered over their hands, masking their movement. Their boots were able to glide quickly and silently over the snow, just like skis. They could hear the growling engines of the Ascalons patrolling through the forest, churning out webs of ice. "How much longer?" asked Evan. "Stop asking," said Xavier. It was difficult to see too far ahead, because the cloud blocked their view as well as the view from above. It was like walking in their own personal fog. Finally, they nearly collided with a large rock jutting out from the side of the mountain through the snow. "This is it," said Levi, relieved. As they got closer, they could see the identical rock right next to it, with a narrow space between them. But the path between the rocks was covered with fresh snow. "It's hard to see the path, though." "It looks slippery," said Brianna, "and steep." Levi put his boot on the space between the rocks where the path was supposed to be. He instantly felt his foot shiver as long cleats burst from the bottom of the boot. "We'll be okay," he said. "Wait," said Xavier. "That sky pod overhead is the only one that has a clear view of the path you're taking. We need to get rid of the bone breakers up there first. You remember what happened last time?" Levi nodded. "Right." "What happened last time?" asked Evan. "The birds attacked us," said Levi. "They were attracted by the glimmer glass. It was shining in the sun, so probably now they'll be looking for us." "How are you going to get rid of the bone breakers?" asked Brianna. Manuel scratched his chin thoughtfully. "I think I have an idea." He dug into his pocket and pulled out the flower bulb Ruach had given him in the Garden of Red. "A flower bulb?" Evan said, arching an eyebrow. "What are you going to do with that?" "Plant it, of course." Manuel smiled crookedly. He took several deep breaths, then softly, counting to himself, he began to creep out into the snow. He tiptoed like a super spy, stopping often to check his position and look around furtively. His movements were a little comical, and Evan started to giggle. Xavier nudged him. When finally Manuel had found the spot he was looking for, he bent down and started digging furiously into the snow. He had to stop every so often to blow warm air onto his hands and shake them out, but he kept digging until he was down so low that he practically disappeared. "Is he seriously trying to plant a bulb in the middle of winter?" asked Ivy. "This is a hortoss," said Xavier. "Anything can happen." Manuel finally resurfaced and low crawled back to the others under the shelter of the cloud. His hands were red and stiff with cold, and his fingers were covered with dirt. A broad grin carved his face. "All set?" "What's supposed to happen?" said Finn. "Well, I'm not exactly sure, but I have an idea why Ruach gave that flower bulb to me." The warriors waited, staring at the hole that Manuel had dug. Nothing happened. "Are you sure?" Evan began, but Xavier nudged him to be quiet. After what seemed like an eternity, something started to poke up from the hole. A greenish stalk, easily seen against the backdrop of snow. It grew taller and then split into several stalks that spread out over the snow and unfolded into purplish-white petals. Flower petals. The petals grew to almost the size of a small car, and then they started to curl upward, forming a large bowl. "A flower?" said Ivy, sounding skeptical. "A big flower," said Evan. "That is cool, but how's that going to help?" asked Brianna. Before Manuel could answer, the cloud that had been protecting the warriors moved until it was directly over the huge flower. Then, to everyone's surprise, it started to rain. "Ruach is watering the flower," said Brianna. "Didn't look to me like it needed watering," said Evan. The cloud dissipated as the rain filled the flower. Then it disappeared altogether. The rain stopped. "The cloud's gone," Brianna said. Her shoulders dropped. The warriors crouched lower, pressing toward the cover of the rock to hide themselves. Why did Rue leave us? He said he would never leave. All of a sudden, the bone breakers on the sky pod far above began to screech, the sound echoing off the mountain. The warriors huddled together, fearful that they had been seen, that the bone breakers were raising an alarm. The birds spread their wings and dove right at them, still screeching. They saw us, Brianna cried. 2 by 2, the bone breakers crashed into the water of the giant flower. They screamed in alarm as the flower petals snapped shut, trapping them inside. The warriors could hear their desperate cries and see the bulges in the petal walls as the birds struggled to get out, but the flower held them fast. Sweet, said Evan. The others echoed his exclamation. Why did they dive into the water? Finn asked. Were they that thirsty? Levi said that bone breakers were attracted to the glass because it was shiny, said Manuel, excited now that his experiment had actually worked. This worked just like my pitcher plant. The sun shining on the water made it sparkle. The birds fell for it. Awesome, Manuel, said Xavier, giving him a high five. But now we need to move fast before Thane figures out what happened. Levi, you and Brianna start going up now. We'll get to the sky pod and keep a lookout for the explosion. Okay. Levi turned to Brianna. You ready, Bean? She smiled. He hadn't called her that in quite a while. Sure thing. Levi went first. He tucked the pot of water inside his belt and stepped onto the icy path. Brianna did the same with her pot and stepped up beside him. Her boots also sprouted cleats. She turned and gave her friends a thumbs up. See you guys soon, she said brightly. You bet you will, said Ivy, giving Brianna another thumbs up. Xavier waited until they were far enough up the mountain that he couldn't see them anymore. Then he took a deep breath and turned to his friends. Ivy and Finn, once things start happening here, you need to run into the forest and find the other warriors who are hiding. Gather them for the attack. But how will we know when the attack happens? Asked Ivy. We can't see the fortress from here. We'll signal you from the sky pod, said Xavier. Just keep an eye on the sky pod. Got it? Got it, said Ivy. Finn nodded. Cool. Xavier turned to Manuel and Evan. You guys will come with me. You ready? Evan gave him a thumbs up. Manuel just nodded nervously. Xavier walked away from the rock and raised his staff high over his head. Tannen, he cried.